I'm Dennis Carlson, and this session is on the fundamental tools of professional fundraising. It was in that role in an Adventist university that I was helped so much by the professional assistance of PSI, Philanthropic Services for Institutions, Adventist institutions. The excellent team at PSI is led by Dr. Lilia Wagner, who's one of the founding faculty members of the fundraising school at the Center on Philanthropy at Indiana University. That's the center point for learning, teaching, research, and publishing for the profession of philanthropy. Fundraising, effective fundraising, consists of the right person asking the right prospect for the right cause, in the right way, at the right time, and for the right amount. Now, the context for this presentation is the local church. Perhaps there's a major building project, a renovation project, a community service center, a school facility, and where the fundraising is primarily from within the congregation. Now, please do remember that within the Seventh-day Adventist Conference system, the policies of the denomination are important to know. Be sure you counsel with the conference leadership on your intended project to be sure you have the appropriate policies and procedures clearly understood. And some conferences can also be donors to your project. It is through the conference that you can borrow money for the project. But wouldn't it be great if you could raise all the money for the project and not have to borrow, pay interest, and have payments years into the future? But now back to that statement of the 6 rights. Notice that little word, ask. Fundraising is the right person asking the right prospect for the right cause in the right way at the right time for the right amount, and having the right follow-up. So there are 2 key words to keep in mind: right, R-I-G-H-T, and ask. So let's talk about the right way. And by that term, the right way, I'm talking about the individual prospective donor, and I'm also talking about the entire project and having it fully planned and communicated before asking for a donation. So the implementation of this ask is something to be very carefully considered. The asking moment generally comes as a natural part of the fundraising process, not at the beginning, but near the end. And yet, it is different for different people. Fundraising is an organized practice, a logical process, one that takes time and careful thought and planning to implement effectively. The foundation for successful special project fundraising is the faithful, systematic returning of tithe and giving of offering support for the local church, the conference, and the work of the worldwide church. Those who give for special projects are very likely already faithful in systematic giving. Now, the emphasis here that fundraising is a process that takes time goes up against the impulse of those who are so fully invested and believe in this project that they're just sure that it can happen in the very next very few months. But remember that there are many steps in the process. Effective fundraising is the right person asking the right prospect for the right cause in the right way at the right time for the right amount. All of those rights include much process. So don't get ahead of the process by assuming everybody is as ready to give now as you might hope. At least they may not be ready to give as much as they really could and hopefully would later in the process. A team needs to be built, a plan put in place, and all must be done ethically and professionally. Now, this is a good point to talk about what professional fundraising is not. It's not begging or coercing or shaming in public or giving a guilt trip or telling people how much they should give. Now, there are some useful tools to use in fundraising at the right time and in the right way. And let's talk about a number of those. One is a big dinner event Now, for a congregation, an early dinner meeting can be helpful for information, but that would be too early to ask for money. You would get some gifts, but likely much less than could be received after careful cultivation of those potential donors. A big dinner event within a congregation, or perhaps for several churches who are constituents of a church school, can be very useful. But rather than asking for personal commitments at that early meeting, I would suggest that you ask two other questions. First, give them a piece of paper and ask them to write. What are your thoughts about the proposed project? Make the point that you are not asking how much they will give, but just their thoughts at this moment. What would you like to have the leadership know? Please give your name, but it's not required. The second question would be a more general question. How do you think this will work for the entire constituency? Is this going to be a successful project? In this question, you will get some specific numbers. You can ask, how much do you think we can raise for this project? Now, the answers to these questions will give you this larger perspective, and the question then lifts the person from personal financial thoughts to the larger potential of the whole church family or several churches. I would suggest that you give each person a full-size sheet of paper with the questions printed on it, and give them plenty of time for them to write out their thoughts, and then collect the papers right away, right then and there. Don't ask them to send them in later or even to drop them in a box at the end of the meeting. Collect them right away. Now, another big event that happens mostly for healthcare and maybe a larger community-based effort is the big gala. And a major star who might come and provide entertainment and an auction and all kinds of ways that funds are raised for a major community benefit. And then there are mailings. Mailings are useful for sharing information about the project or the planning for the project, but very ineffective for major fundraising. Not long ago, I got a letter myself from an organization that has a big dream, costs $5 million, and they said, here's the dream, here's what it'll cost, give as you can. I don't think that's a very effective way to raise major dollars. Another tool in fundraising are sales, bake sales, auctions, newspaper collections, growing corn, rummage sales. But in the local church setting, these kinds of activities are not effective for major fundraising, but they can involve the entire congregation. The youth love to do car washes. Let them do car washes and other kinds of fun things to do together. Then there's phone solicitation. Now, this campaign is very important and useful for an ongoing need, perhaps called an annual fund, or for some budget that continues. But in major fundraising, the phone call approach comes very close to the end of the campaign. After all those major gifts have been committed and you have maybe the last 10 or 15% to raise for the goal, then you make this general effort so that everyone who has perhaps not given yet can also be involved in the support for the project. Then there's social media. So find members of the current younger generation who live in the context of social media and get them involved in setting this all up, and it creates this communication, this chatty and yet very effective way of influencing people and spreading the word, and people will say, hey, if she's involved, then I want to be involved. And then there are email lists. That's an essential. Write often, make it short, to the point, keep it up to date. And then there's public promotion. The pastor and other church leaders should be talking about the project publicly. Now, in your planning, be sure to contact the PSI offices for help and counsel. We're so very fortunate to have this very professional fundraising resource. Then comes personal solicitation. This is that moment, the face-to-face request for financial help or a major donation. This appointment will come after perhaps a half a dozen personal engagement points for that prospective donor, such as involvement in the prospect and the project that is set forth. Perhaps in the local church setting, most of the major donors are already personally involved in the planning and the deciding process, but still, there is the right time to ask. And then you build this list of possible donors who might want to give to this project. More on this later. Then a budget. Your board and the members of your church must realize that it costs money to raise money. Now, how much is the question? There's a lot of emphasis and study on that question in the professional ranks of philanthropy. Some say if it takes 25 cents to raise a dollar, that's acceptable. Some say 33 cents. And of course, in the local church setting, the less the better. I would say that if you have a significant capital campaign, you should have some extra staff and consultants to make the gift initiative successful within a reasonable amount of time. A capital campaign that takes too long will lose any momentum that it may have had. So I would say, plan for at least 10 cents to raise a dollar. You do the math for your project. Now, usually the pastor is already too busy to give the time and attention that's really needed for major fundraising and managing the whole thing, although he or she is key to the success of the campaign. And others who may be very capable in your church are probably busy in their careers and they can be volunteers to talk to their peers. But you need someone who manages the entire project. So consider a campaign director who will organize the process of fundraising and bring to the table the consultants that are needed. Be sure your first call is to the PSI office. Now, accountability is vital. Whoever's leading needs to be accountable to a committee, a board, and actually the entire congregation. Now let's talk about this idea of the right cause, or being more specific, what are the reasons for the fundraising effort? And this then leads to a statement of why people should give to this project, commonly called the case statement, or the case for support. Now, it's important to insert here two very important key terms, readiness and feasibility. It is vital for you to have a careful and analytical study in terms of the readiness of your congregation to tackle a particular project or campaign. So, some of the obvious questions would include the size of your congregation, the makeup of it, the demographics, the amount of tithe that your members return. Is your church budget up to date? Or is there a long-standing split in your church? So the campaign ideas that are likely not to be successful are those that are just for looks, or wouldn't it be nice, or just the desire of the pastor, or maybe it's just one big single donor who believes in something. Now, another thing that I would very strongly suggest for you is to have some statements on the policies and the procedures for fundraising. Maybe this is usually done for a university setting, but even in a local church setting, especially for a larger project, have some policies and procedures. It's a very important tool. And PSI can provide you with some examples for this. This document will articulate such matters as what kind of gifts can you receive or that you won't receive, and other things like a naming policy. Now, one of the most important tools in your toolbox is the case statement. The case statement should include the following. First of all, a clear statement about the problem or the need or the opportunity and what the solution is or how to address that opportunity. And why is this important to the congregation in terms of the mission statement? How will your values guide this project? And remember that fundraising is really an exchange of values. Donors exchange their money for the fulfillment of the values of the mission of the church, and an explanation of what will be done to reach the anticipated outcomes. So it's important to very clearly articulate who will make this all happen and what are the pertinent details and what is the larger plan. So let's talk about the right prospect. Where do you find those who can give major donations and also the many who can together make a difference? Let me make sure you know about the gift range chart. This is a very careful scientific way to determine the number of donors in different categories of giving for a certain size goal. If you have, say, a $5 million goal, it will tell you what the lead gift must be and all the lesser gifts and how many donors. This is an excellent planning tool. Please call the PSI offices for help in this. And I will add that this is a centerpiece of the value that a consultant can bring to your planning process. You, the pastor, and your leadership team likely already know who can give the larger gifts to a given project, so you can be building that list right from the very beginning from your church directory. And indeed, it is true, local projects are funded largely from within that constituency, that church membership. But it must be said here that building and keeping a list of potential donors is a combination of human relation skills as you talk to those potential donors and the use of technology to keep careful lists and records. Have a computer program that will keep those careful donor records. And remember, they're private, only for the management team of the campaign. But then you can also think outside your congregation. Perhaps your project is going to be of real community benefit. There are other possible donors. So as you build your list of potential donors, include community foundations and businesses. Build relationships with the managers, the officers of foundations that may be community-based, or some foundations from within the Adventist family church membership. It would be helpful perhaps for you to have a grant writer who could give you good counsel on which foundations may be interested in your project. Now, another important area is donor research. It's one of the disciplines of professional philanthropic fundraising. In the local church setting, it's probably obvious to all who can give the large gifts, but you never know what the wealth may be among some of the members of your church. Also, planned giving through estate planning is another important way that your project can be funded. The Trust Services Department of your conference can help you in this area. The cultivation of the prospects is a process that can take some time. This is an important point. A key element is personal involvement of that prospect in the envisioning and the planning for the project. Get those major gift prospects on site and in the meetings and in the conversations about the project. So in that context, you will begin to learn what level of giving might be asked for. You will also learn what parts or elements of the project they might be interested in. Give recognition for those who make significant gifts and for a general set of gifts as well. So let's talk about the right person. The right person asking. Now, all the planning and the personal relationships that lead toward that moment when a potential donor is asked for a certain amount. That's what we're talking about. By the time that meeting takes place, the potential donor will know what the meeting is about. Now, here's where the peers are important. one professional talking to another, one business person talking to another. That's an important key. Now, the pastor or the fundraising director may and perhaps should be involved in that visit, but including a peer who has already made a commitment is vital, I believe. Remember, people give to people with a cause or project that accomplishes the mission. Now let's talk about the right way to ask for a major commitment. This means privately, specifically, and respectfully. You're not telling, but you're asking. It's a proposal, not a demand. And then there's the matter of the right time. Timing is crucial in two ways. First, in regard to the overall project, that you don't ask too soon. It comes near the end for these larger potential donors. And secondly, in terms of the personal life of the donor, be sensitive to what's happening in her or his life. And then the right amount. Here's where your knowledge is important. You've built a relationship with the person, you have some idea of what they could give, and then the fine art of asking for a specific amount is defined by not asking for too much or too little. I would say that you should use your best judgment and use your understanding of their potential and settle on a number of what you're going to ask, and then add 10%. I would call this the complement factor. You will have overestimated their wealth and their potential a little bit, and they will likely see that as a compliment. Too much would put the donor off, as would too little of an ask. Remember that this is an exchange of values, not a begging or a pressure point. The context here is for the major gifts that will lead the fundraising and make its success possible. Now, I believe, from my experience in reading, that at least 3/4 of the funds needed should be in hand or seriously committed before these additional asks for smaller amounts on the gift range chart are addressed, or before there is some phoning or a general mail appeal. So, now you have accomplished having the right person asking the right prospect for the right cause in the right way at the right time for the right amount. And then the commitment is made and the gift is given. It's a wonderful moment in time. Now what do? What's the right follow-up? Well, of course, you say thank you in a personal note, along with a formal letter with a prompt receipt, and perhaps personally as well. And of course, you keep the gift confidential unless the donor wants it more widely known, especially among his or her peers. Reports are so important. Major donors should have personal reports in terms of the purpose of their gift, as well as the general reports for the progress of the entire project. This report will establish the fact that the funds are being used for the purpose the donor gave them, one of the most important points in fundraising. This will set the stage for additional giving to this or other projects. Remember that a gift given is a heart and soul engaged. So I wish for you the blessings of heaven and great success in your fundraising endeavors.